I don't believe that anyone is coming into the United States of America or the UK, as a matter of fact, because they want to bring about a Salafist-style Islamic caliphate in London. I know you won't agree with me on this.
It's not about whether I agree; it's about whether the facts agree with you.
I don't think that's the case.
Hold on.
I think ultimately,
let me just give you some facts then. If that we have a terrorist attack on a monthly basis by an Islamist, effectively, we just had 2 in the space of the last month as we're recording this. 33%, I think, of British Muslims want Sharia law in Britain, like according to polls. More than half want to ban.
I haven't seen these polls.
Well, we can put them in for people to see. More than half want to ban homosexuality. Right? So when you say people aren't coming in to introduce an Islamist stuff, well, some of them want to if they're in a position to do so. We have 5 MPs who are effectively elected on a sectarian ticket, like as in we are Muslims, vote for us because you're a Muslim.
Who would you say those MPs are?
The 5 independent MPs. They're called the Gaza MPs or whatever way you want to call them. Right?
Are you talking about like Zara Sultana?
I don't know if she's one of them. I think one of them is called Adnan Hussein. There's 5 of them. We can look them up. We can put them in for people to see. Right. So I think it should be said that the overwhelming majority of British Muslims don't want Sharia law. But if 33% of them do, you can see why a lot of people who don't want Sharia law might be concerned about that, right?
Sure. I don't know what I haven't seen these polls, and I also don't know what British Muslims, or the 33% that are saying they want Sharia law, like what they're talking about.
If you want smart, fearless commentary on the craziest things happening in media, politics, and online culture, you'll love the Brad vs. Everyone podcast, hosted by Brad Palumbo, an independent journalist who calls it like it is. The podcast covers viral madness from across the political and cultural spectrum, and no one's safe. He goes after Gen Z TikTok scammers and far-right grifters. He'll take apart progressive media darlings and MAGA influencers, all from a place of sharp moderation, not blind loyalty. Think of it like TRIGGERnometry's younger American cousin. Same instinct for cutting through the noise, same appetite for the stories everyone else is too scared or too biased to cover. If you like your commentary honest, sharp, and entirely uncancelable, find Brad vs. Everyone on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen.
The counterexample always is, I mean, there's plenty of right-wing forces in the country that also want to ban homosexuality. Or trans people in general, right?
No one wants to ban trans people in Britain. No.
Okay. Well, that's not what I have seen so far, but maybe I'm wrong on this.
What do you mean?
But I feel like there's a lot of this is a point of contention for you guys as well. But it's like when you want to ban trans people altogether, when you want to remove access to medication for trans people to transition and conform their own gender identity, you don't start off by saying we want to altogether ban trans people. You start off by trying to find the most successful approach that the broadest majority of the masses would be in tune with, would be in agreement with, and then you slowly but surely expand on it.
Wouldn't that be like me saying, well, you say you want socialism, but actually you're a communist because you just want to edge your way towards communism step by step? I mean, that seems like an unfair way of looking at it. No, my
retort to that would be that while I don't call myself a communist, I don't have an issue with an end goal of communism. I don't think it's like I just think that it's probably not likely to happen, a stateless, moneyless, borderless society. But moving towards that end goal, I don't have any real...
You'd like communism in America?
I think that communism would be most likely an international thing. It'd be like the Star Trek universe. And it feels, especially at this point, it feels far too utopian to achieve. So while I think that the concept in and of itself is not one that I disagree with, and I don't think you would either. Don't you think it would be nicer?
I grew up in a communist country. I very strongly disagree with the concept of communism.
The USSR was, as you know as well, trying to implement communism. They never actually were able to successfully implement communism.
How do you mean?
Well, it wasn't a borderless, moneyless, classless society. Right?
That was never the goal of communism. It was never to be a borderless, moneyless society.
No, that is what communism is.
Well, that's not how the communists in Russia defined it.
Well,
there was a big debate within communism quite early on, which was about, are we pursuing a global state of communism?
Trotsky versus Stalin.
I'm
very familiar.
Right, but for our audience, this might be worth explaining.
Yeah.
Some of them they basically recognized the only way you might ever get to a communist society is if everyone in the world gets it. Otherwise, there will always be a capitalist system to which people would be keen to defect. Or, this is the Stalin option that they ended up going for, is you pursue communism within the realm of one country. And in order to do that, they took the wealth away from people who had it. They tried to distribute it to everybody else. They tried to create a state of equality, uplift the poor, as you were talking about. And actually, if you take those measures alone, they were very successful at it. Mm-hmm. The only problem is they ended up putting millions of people in camps in order to do that, creating a tyrannical regime with a secret police that murdered people. And that is the reason communism, in my opinion, doesn't work, is because in order to achieve that goal of equality, and basically you're making everybody equally poor as the end result, you actually have to use a lot of force, right? So that was communism, what we had in the USSR.
Well, that the end goal was never successfully achieved in the USSR in terms of establishing what I'm talking about, though. And that's why I'm saying it's important to understand and recognize the failures of this implementation in the aftermath of a socialist revolution and choose not to repeat those mistakes.
So how would you do it differently?
Well, that's the reason why I pointed to China. China is run by the Communist Party of China. It bills itself as communist. China is not a communist country. Would you say China is a communist country?
It's a mixed country. It has some elements of communism, but it's also got a lot of capitalism going on.
Yeah,
right?
So it's a mixed market economy is what you're saying, right? But so is the United States of America if you look at it from that perspective, because America also has some semblance of social safety nets. The UK also has some social safety nets, some state-run enterprises, especially pre-Margaret Thatcher, I would say, versus private enterprises as well. Venezuela at its peak, I think, had more privatization and more private enterprise in its economy than France did, as a matter of fact. I believe there was like a report at around 2012, maybe, where they were talking about how like Venezuela is not socialist. When these sorts of countries, and you're not wrong, it's a mixture of both, right? It exists. Social safety nets exist. Some extrapolation initiatives exist. Like when you think about Norway, for example, the entirety of the extraction industry in Norway is actually nationalized from the forestry all the way down to the oil and gas industry. But then there's also the private market as well, private enterprise as well. So as far as that goes, I wouldn't say that China is a communist, and neither would you, but it's run by a communist party. And so far, they have seen a pretty successful, pretty robust level of growth and development overall. So they have analyzed the failures of previous communist and socialist formations, and they have responded to it in their own way.
The challenge is, Hasan, when you centralize power and you give practically all the power to the government, what happens with that is you're far more likely to have corruption, you're far more likely to have abuse of power, and inevitably what happens is that the government can't do everything. There are things that are far better done by private practice than done by state control. So if you
I agree with that. Would you also agree that there are things that are far better done in the hands of the government, or at least with like heavy market regulation and intervention?
I completely agree.
Because like healthcare, I think is a great example of this, where like it's an inelastic demand good and service, right? If you don't have healthcare, you die. So you will pay whatever price you have to pay for healthcare. And therefore, I think the American system that is the most maximalist, most capitalist, most like free enterprise system has been an abject failure in terms of delivering good results. And what I mean by that is healthcare as a whole is supposed to improve people's living standards and also make sure that everyone is getting the best quality care possible, right? And in the United States of America, we don't have that. We do have nicer hospitals resemble hotels as opposed to like.
I'll be honest with you, it'd be difficult not to have a nicer hospital than the UK, mate.
But yeah, no, but but I understand that. I'm from Turkey. I've seen the Turkish public hospitals, but I would rather try to focus on the diminished quality of service and try to improve that in a socialized system than to altogether limit healthcare at the point of being able to pay for it in the way that we have in the United States of America. And I think this is a major issue with America in general, is that we are so invested in improving our GDP. We're so invested in leaning into the forces of capital that in this sector and in many others, corruption still thrives. We have it in the form of corporate consolidation here in the United States of America, because in the absence of any sort of government intervention, trust busting, and heavy regulatory intervention, all corporations end up trying to seize one another and become a force, a monopolistic force, and if not, an oligopoly, right? And many sectors have seen this. And when you become an oligopoly, you can diminish the quality of service that you're offering slowly but surely, because there's no market competition that exists any longer. So I guess the way I look at it is, in terms of corruption, you're right. There is a tendency, if the government is all powerful, even though the governments are always all powerful, there is a tendency in more centralized governance that if someone wants to be a ruthless autocrat, they can do so. And the people don't always have the capacity to rise up against that. But I would say that in the United States of America, for example, we also experience a similar dynamic. We just don't see it in the same way, because it's not the most direct form of authoritarianism, where a lot of people think, well, as long as I can eat a Big Mac, as long as I can watch TV, as long as I can consume porn and gamble on the unregulated cryptocurrency market, or gamble my modest income away, what remains after I give the rest to my landlord, then things are probably fine. And I think we dull our sensibilities in that regard. And I think it's a different form, it's a different mechanism of control that makes you think that you are actually an active participant in this.
I mean, I think that's quite a stretch, Hasan, with all respect, because the difference between, we talked about some societies that have attempted to pursue communism, China, the Soviet Union, Venezuela, etc., right? The difference between those countries is not that they can't eat a Big Mac. The difference is that if they criticize the government, in Russia today even, but of course in the Soviet Union previously, you're going to get killed, right? In America, that's not what happens, right? In America, you don't get...
We don't know yet. We don't know where we're going to go yet.
I mean, Hasan, to be fair, you're a very successful...
I agree with you.
You in China or in the Soviet Union would be killed if you were critical of that regime.
I would definitely be jailed.
You'd definitely be jailed.
Yeah,
so that's the difference between these countries and America. It's not a Big Mac, it's freedom.
No, so I love that you brought that up, because I agree with that. I'm from Turkey, a country that has never had the First Amendment or freedom of speech. And ironically enough, the current regime, the person in charge of the current regime, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, was jailed in the past for a poem that he wrote for incitement, right? He read a poem about Atatürk, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and he was jailed. And now he's one of the most ruthless jailers of the press in the country.
Right.
Now, so I come from that background. I can't go back to Turkey, for example,
right?
For these reasons. I've written about Turkey extensively. And, let's just say the administration is not super fond of me in my perspective. Having said that, that is the reason why I want the First Amendment to remain in the United States of America, even though, as I brought up earlier, there have been instances throughout American history where the First Amendment has been actively violated or threatened. There are still contemporary examples of violations of the First Amendment. One example I will use is the anti-boycott, divestment, and sanctions laws that exist in the United States of America. Famously, it was Bernie Sanders and Dianne Feinstein, rest in peace, who actively called it out. Two prominent Jewish politicians in the country. These are laws directly written by AIPAC that dictate that if you want to become a school teacher in the state of Texas, for example, you have to sign a loyalty pledge to ensure that you never protest against the state of Israel. It's ridiculous, right? And it's a direct violation of the First Amendment. So there is encroachment towards the First Amendment.
That will always happen because people will always contest it. But the point I'm making to you is when you compare China and the Soviet Union and Venezuela to America, that is not an accurate comparison.
It's not an accurate comparison, but if you recall earlier, I just said, I'm worried that we here in the United States of America are now moving in that direction in terms of social repression, in terms of political repression. And this is something that I very much fear. I think the entry point to this is usually around Israel and what people decry as anti-Semitism, but that's not where it's going to end. If you look at the Trump administration's the active initiatives the administration is taking, yesterday, my friend Kat Abugzaleh, who used to be a reporter who's now running in Illinois for Congress, was indicted. She was indicted because she participated in the protest against ICE outside of an ICE facility. And there are videos of her getting slammed to the ground in the concrete with this militarized, masked federal police force, right? Not only did they beat her up, which was already ridiculous to begin with, but then they also chose to indict her. There are examples of students writing for their student newspaper and getting kidnapped and thrown into a immigrant detention facility, whether it be Mahmoud Khalil, who still has an ongoing legal case for being a student activist, a student protester, and having a green card while doing it.
We have the same thing in our country in different ways. I hear you. The reason I'm interrupting you is we've moved sideways from the topic. So remember where we started this conversation, right? So just to address your point.
The repression didn't start in China by everybody being like, all right, it's over, we're throwing you in jail. It builds up to it is what I mean. And it's entirely dependent on the starting point. Because if you were looking at China, if you're looking at the Chinese Civil War, post-World War II, 30 million Chinese people have been slaughtered ruthlessly by the Japanese imperialists. Like, that's a very different material, that's a very different set of material circumstances for the end of that civil war and to develop governance.
Fine.
Similar to the
I'm
USSR.
just trying to bring you back to the central argument, with central discussion we're having. Francis made the point that when the government is in a position to be authoritarian, where it seems to inevitably end up in every communist country in the history of the world, right? That is a situation which inevitably then leads to levels of repression of the kind that you will not see in America for 100 years. I take your point about individual protesters or individual people who've made statements about a highly controversial issue today. We have the same thing in our country where people are being sent to prison for tweets that they've done, right? Left and right. We've got Palestine Action on the left. We've got right-wing people criticizing immigration. So I agree with you. The direction of travel in the West in terms of freedom of expression is not good. And I've made that point in my book and elsewhere. But that is not the same as what the point we're trying to make, which is the system of government you are open to, based on our discussion today at least, inevitably leads to authoritarianism, which inevitably leads to repression on a scale that a Western country won't imagine. Isn't that's the reason that a lot of people are very worried about people like you who say they're open to communism. We all know smartphones are essential, but they've also become the ultimate surveillance machines. That's why we were so interested when former TRIGGERnometry guest Eric Prince created the UpPhone. This isn't just another handset. The UpPhone runs on Unplugged OS, free from big tech ecosystems. It comes with a firewall that blocks third-party trackers and gives you full transparency into who's trying to access your data. And it works straight out of the box. I got one of these myself because I want to know my phone is serving me, not Google, not Apple, and not some faceless data broker. And that's the point. Your phone should serve you, not spy on you. Check it out at unplugged.com/TRIGGERnometry and use our code TRIGGERnometry for $20 off a protective case with the UpPhone.
Here, I'll try to put a nice button on it, okay? Mm-hmm. The reason why the United States of America and countries that are under the security apparatus, the global security umbrella of the United States of America, have had much more success with liberal democracy as opposed to all these other countries that are not under the immediate security umbrella, is because it's been the domineering force around the globe, especially after the end of the Cold War, but even during the Cold War, it was a dominant force on the planet.
Sure.
When you are the dominant force, you get to have these freedoms. Your people get to have these freedoms. Your people get to say whatever they want, because they're not a threat, right? I would be more of a threat in the respective nation that I'm in if they don't have that same level of security. And that is the reason why I'm very fearful, because as America's power on the global stage is waning, we are going to see more direct authoritarianism coming from Western nations as liberalism decays, as it did in the 20s and the 30s. And what came after that was a wave of fascism. Now, fascism at that time was seen as a revolutionary thing. It was seen as a new thing. In many instances, fascists were actually fashioning themselves as though they were like a different kind of socialist, even though they were mostly killing socialists and had their beef with socialists. And then they were able to align with liberals eventually and become the domineering authoritarian forces. And I think you guys wouldn't disagree with me that, like, you know, Italy's Mussolini and Adolf Hitler's Nazi Germany were ruthless fascist forms of governance where there was unimaginable repression. My fear is that is where capitalism inevitably leads.
Why?
If left unaddressed, because capitalism is always going to deteriorate. It's slowly going to improve material conditions as opposed to feudalism. It's a far better system, for sure. It's far better than monarchies, right? I agree. But there will come a point where it outlives its usefulness, and those who own the capital, the owners of capital, will have to make a decision. There's too much instability. There's too much chaos. We need to restore order. And if they can't do that through liberal democracy, at least historically, especially when there is a counterbalance, revolutionary socialism out there that they are genuinely fearful of, work stoppages happening all around, and the flows of capital being disrupted, and profit margins are threatened, they end up finding fascism to be that domineering force that restores the law and order, so that people are still working in the factories, and any kind of dissent is directly and indirectly suppressed. And I fear that is where we're moving in the United States of America, as America's global superpower status is threatened by the rise of China.
So your thesis is that as country, if a different country was dominant, was the global hegemon, they would have more freedom for their citizens.
Yeah.
So you think the Chinese Communist Party would allow criticism of them if they were the dominant country in the world?
I think with respect to where they were in terms of, like, I mean, the most maximalist position is the Cultural Revolution, right? Like, if you look at the Cultural Revolution versus where China is now in terms of dissent, it's in comparison to the United States of America. Yes, there's still heavy control over that sort of stuff. There's a lot of surveillance. Having said that, it has become far more tolerant as material conditions have improved. And that's my main thesis, is that countries, regardless of their individual forms of governance, as long as they are advancing the material needs of the broadest subset of the masses, will and become like a domineering force on their own and have full sovereignty and full autonomy, they will inevitably become more tolerant to this kind of freedom, because this is the most successful way, I think, of making sure that the masses feel satisfied. Civil liberties is the most successful way that I think neoliberalism has become a hegemonic power, beyond the endless militarism and whatnot. I think that is the reason why people feel the way that they do in the United States of America, in spite of all of the alarm bells that are ringing about how economic devastation is imminent, seemingly, or there's so much poverty and so much instability, and people still go, well, at least I got some freedoms, right? As opposed to not having those freedoms elsewhere. So that's my main thesis, is that if they improve material conditions, they have to inevitably allow more civil liberties, more social liberties.